Notification came in at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, lying on top of the covers in a hotel room in Calgary, watching the ceiling fan turn. I had a site inspection the next morning. I'm a structural engineer, been doing bridge assessments for the province for 16 years, and I always sleep badly the first night away from home. My brain won't shut off. Always making lists, always checking. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I assumed it was my alarm going off wrong or a weather alert, something meaningless. I reached for it without sitting up. It was a video notification, 11 seconds, from my son's account. My son, Ethan, was 9 years old and staying with my brother and his wife while I was away. My brother. I'll call him by his role here because that's how I think of him now, not by his name. My brother lived 40 minutes outside of Toronto in a house with a big property. Acreage, a detached garage that he'd been converting into a workshop for 3 years. It was always locked. Ethan had been given my old smartwatch the previous Christmas. He liked to use it to send voice messages to my mother. He'd figured out, apparently, how to send short videos through it. I pressed play. The screen was dark, almost completely black. You could see the outline of something, a wall maybe, or a shelf, caught in the faint glow of the watch face, and then you could hear him. Dad. His voice was low, very low, like he was scared someone would hear. Dad, if you get this, I don't have my phone. Uncle Dale took it. I don't know what day it is. I think I'd been in here for a long time. I'm really hungry, Dad. I'm really hungry for a long time. I'm really hungry, Dad. I'm really, really hungry. Please, please come. 11 seconds. I sat up. I played it again. I turned the lamp on and sat on the edge of the bed and played it a third time, and I remember thinking very clearly, in a way that felt strange and distant. That is my son's voice, and something is very wrong. I called him back on the watch. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my brother's cell. Nothing. I called his wife's cell. Nothing. I looked at the time again. 2052 in the morning. I'd been sitting there for 5 minutes doing nothing. I called 911. The operator was patient with me. She had to be, because I was not making a lot of sense at first. I kept starting sentences and stopping. My son sent me a video. He said he was in a garage. He said he was hungry. She asked me how old he was. She asked me how old he was. She asked me when I'd last spoken to him. That was what stopped me. When had I last spoken to him? I dropped him at my brother's house on Friday evening. It was now early Tuesday morning. I had texted Ethan on Saturday afternoon, just a quick, "How's it going, bud?" And my brother had replied from his own phone, "He's great, having a blast, don't worry." I'd assumed Ethan was outside or busy and hadn't thought twice about it. My brother had texted me, that was enough. Except that hadn't been Ethan. My brother had replied for him. I told the 911 operator all of this. She took down my brother's address. She told me officers would be dispatched to conduct a welfare check and that I would be kept informed. I hung up and stood in the middle of that hotel room in Calgary, and I did not know what to do with my body. I called my mother. I woke her up. I told her what had happened, and she made a sound I'd never heard from her before, a kind of short, sharp exhale, and she said, "Go home, Derek, get in your car and go home right now." She lives near Barrie. She said she'd drive to my brother's property and meet the police there. I checked flights on my phone. The first one out of Calgary to Toronto was at 6:10 a.m., 3 hours away. I booked it. Then I got in my rental car and drove to the airport and sat in the departures terminal for 2.5 hours, calling Ethan's watch every 20 minutes, calling my brother's cell, calling his wife's cell, and getting no answer from any of them. My mother called me at 4:30. The police had arrived at the property. My brother's wife had come to the front door. She'd said Ethan was asleep inside, that everything was fine, that she didn't understand what the problem was. The officers had asked to see him. She'd said he was at a friend's house. In 4.5 minutes, the story had changed completely. The officers had noted the discrepancy and asked to search the property. She'd said they'd need a warrant. They were working on it. I boarded the plane at 6:05. By the time we were in the air, I had my hands pressed flat on my knees because they wouldn't stop shaking, and the woman in the window seat asked if I was afraid of flying, and I said no, I just needed to get home, and I couldn't explain the rest. I want to be precise about the timeline because when I've told this story, people have raised their eyebrows at how long things took. Yes, I was in the air for almost 4 hours. Yes, it seemed like the police should have been able to act faster. What people don't understand, what I didn't understand at the time, sitting on that plane and white-knuckling the armrest, is that my brother's property had a long private laneway, and the detached garage was not visible from the road, and the officers couldn't enter without a warrant once she'd refused consent. They were not slow, they were doing it correctly. I know that now. In the moment, it nearly killed me. The warrant came due at 9:47 a.m. Ontario time. My plane landed at 10:15. I had a rental car at the airport, but I don't remember getting into it. I remember calling my mother while I was still in the terminal, and she said they had him. They had Ethan. He was with the paramedics. She was crying. My mother is 71 years old, and I've never heard her cry on the phone before that morning. I drove too fast the whole way. I know I did. I remember seeing the speedometer and not caring. 40 minutes from Pearson to my brother's property, and I did it in 29. There were 2 OPP cruisers in the driveway when I got there, and an ambulance with the back doors open, and my mother was standing on the gravel with a blanket over her shoulders. Even though it wasn't cold, she pointed me toward the ambulance, and I ran. Ethan was on a stretcher. He was pale in a way I'd never seen on him before. He's a boy who spends half his life outdoors, always sunburned across the nose, always scraped up from some adventure, but he was pale and his cheekbones looked sharp under the skin and his lips were cracked. A paramedic had an IV line running into his left arm. He saw me and said, "Dad," and that was all he got out before I had both arms around him and my face pressed into the top of his head, and I was just saying his name over and over, like if I said it enough times it would be the same as the 4 days I'd lost. He had been in that garage since Saturday morning. 4 days. He was 9 years old. 4 days with no food, a sleeping bag on a concrete floor, and a half-empty jug of water that the paramedic said had run out sometime the day before. The detective who spoke to me in the driveway was a woman named, actually, I won't use her name without permission, but I'll say she was calm in the way that experienced investigators are calm, not cold, not distant, just very steady, like someone who has learned how to be the still point in a room that's spinning. I needed that. She walked me through what they knew so far. My brother and his wife had driven away from the property sometime Sunday evening, according to a neighbor who'd noticed the truck leaving. They had not returned. Their phones were going to voicemail because the phones had been turned off or discarded. There was an attempt underway to locate them. I asked her why. Why had they done this? She said she couldn't answer that yet. She said there would be a full investigation. What I found out later, over the following weeks as the case developed, was both simpler and more complicated than I'd expected. My brother had been in financial trouble for over a year. He'd borrowed money from me twice, which I'd given without hesitation because he was my brother. What I hadn't known was that he'd borrowed from other people too, people who were not as patient about repayment. His wife had been pushing him to ask me for a larger sum, a real sum, enough to clear the debts, and I had turned it down. I hadn't even known that was what the conversation was. I'd thought we were just talking. I'd thought things were fine. They decided, apparently, that having Ethan as a kind of leverage would make me more cooperative. That is what the police told me. That is what I have had to sit with. My brother thought that keeping my son in a locked garage, 4 days, no food, concrete floor, would make me write a check. I need to tell you something about the weeks after, because this part matters. Ethan was in sick kids for 2 nights, dehydration, some blood sugar issues, a small infection from a cut on his foot that he'd gotten trying to work the garage door mechanism from the inside. He was discharged on Thursday. He came home with me to our house in Mississauga, and he slept in my bed for 3 weeks because he wouldn't sleep alone, and I did not once ask him to go back to his own room. He could have slept in my bed until he was 30. I didn't care. The thing that people don't see when they hear a story like this is the small stuff. It's not the crisis that undoes you. It's the Tuesday afternoon 2 months later when Ethan gets into the car after school and doesn't say anything, and you ask if he wants a snack, and he says, "Can we just go home?" in this small voice. And you just know something moved through him. Some memory or shadow of a thing. And you drive home and you make hot chocolate and you sit on the back steps together and you don't ask questions because he'll talk when he's ready, and he does eventually, and when he does you listen. We had a therapist, a good one, specializes in childhood trauma, works with kids and parents together. She was the one who told me something I've repeated many times since. Children are very good at telling you what they need. The hard part is learning to hear it before it becomes a scream. Ethan had been telling me things in the weeks before that trip to Calgary, small things. I don't really want to go to Uncle Dale's. Does it have to be Uncle Dale's? I'd heard it as ordinary preference, the way kids push back on clans. I hadn't heard it as information. I will always be working on that. My brother was picked up in Windsor 3 days after the warrant was executed. He'd apparently been planning to cross into Michigan, but he'd made some logistical error. I've never been given the specific details, and the border services flagged him before he could get through. His wife was arrested at a motel off the 401 near Kingston the same day. They were each charged with unlawful confinement, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, and failing to provide the necessities of life to a person under care. In Canada, that last one carries serious weight. The Crown prosecutor added a charge of uttering threats after some text messages were recovered from my brother's phone, messages sent to me during the weekend that I'd read as normal check-ins, but which contained coded references to the situation that I hadn't understood at the time. When the investigators showed them to me, I felt sick. The messages were right there in my phone. I had been carrying them around for days and hadn't known what they meant. My brother received a sentence of 7.5 years. His wife received 6 years and 4 months. There was no early parole provision applied at sentencing. The judge made specific note of the deliberate nature of the confinement and the vulnerability of the victim. I was present for the sentencing. I sat in the back of the courtroom in Brampton and I listened to the judge read the decision. And I felt not satisfaction exactly, but something like the sudden absence of a sound you've been hearing so long you stopped noticing it. It was over. Or at least that chapter was. There's something else I have to tell you. And it's the part of this story that I struggled the longest to know how to say. My ex-wife Ethan's mother, Renee, had known. Not everything, not the extent of it, but she had spoken to my sister-in-law 2 weeks before the trip and had been told in vague terms that something was being planned to get me to cooperate with the money situation. Renee had not told me. She'd told herself it was probably nothing, that her ex-sister-in-law was being dramatic, that it wouldn't actually come to anything. When the police spoke to her, she was cooperative. She told them everything immediately. She was not charged with anything. The Crown determined that her knowledge was too indirect and her inaction, while morally significant, didn't meet the threshold for criminal liability. I understand the legal reasoning. I do. But Ethan is her son too. I don't have a clean ending to that part. I don't have forgiveness sitting ready like a gift I can hand across. What I have is a child who needed both his parents to be paying attention. And one of them wasn't, and the consequences were 4 days on a concrete floor, and cracked lips and an IV line in a small arm. I'm civil with her. I'm respectful. We co-parent because Ethan needs us to, and I will not let my feelings become his problem. But some things don't fully close. I think I'm allowed to say that. Ethan is 12 now. He plays rep hockey, center, surprisingly fast for his size. He started volunteering last spring at a program through the YMCA that runs recreational activities for kids in the child welfare system. He came home one evening after his second shift and sat down at the kitchen table and said, without me asking, "Dad, some of those kids have nobody coming to get them." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I know." He nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. Then he asked if we had any of those crackers with the peanut butter in them left, and I said probably, and he went and looked, and life continued. He doesn't talk about the garage directly. The therapist says that's okay, that silence about trauma isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's just the way a person organizes their interior life. What I see when I watch him with those kids at the Y is something specific and unmistakable. He pays attention to the ones who don't ask for anything, the quiet ones. The ones who sit at the edge of the group and wait to see if someone will come and sit beside them. He always does. They put him in that garage to make him into something broken. I want you to know that it didn't work. I keep coming back to a small thing. Not the courtroom, not the ambulance, not the moment I heard Ethan's voice through that watch screen at 2:37 in the morning. I keep coming back to the Saturday afternoon text. He's great, having a blast. Don't worry. I read it, felt relieved, and put my phone back in my pocket. I took my brother at his word because that's what I'd always done. He was family. That's the part that took the longest to sit with. Not what Dale did, that I could name, categorize, hand over to a court. What took longer was understanding my own role in a much quieter failure. I had raised my brother to the level of unquestioned trust, and somewhere along the way stopped paying attention to whether that trust was still being earned. Trust without attention isn't really trust. It's just habit. And habits don't protect anyone. Ethan had told me, not loudly, not urgently, not in any way I could have easily acted on, but he'd told me. Does it have to be Uncle Dale's? I heard preference. I should have heard information. That distinction between what a child says and what a child means is something I think about more carefully now than I ever did before. Intelligence isn't only about solving problems in front of you. Sometimes it's about noticing which questions you forgot to ask. What my son did in that garage at 9 years old, figuring out how to send a video through a smartwatch he'd been given as a Christmas gift, keeping his voice low so no one would hear, staying coherent enough to say the things that mattered, that wasn't luck. That was a mind working under pressure. I don't say that as a brag. I say it because I think we underestimate what children are capable of when they have been raised to believe that their voice will be received. He sent that message because some part of him believed I would come. That belief is something I had to earn over years of ordinary Tuesdays, and it was the most important thing I'd ever built without knowing I was building it. The recovery was not linear. There were good months and hard months. There were nights when Ethan woke up and couldn't tell me why, and mornings when he was entirely himself again, loud and hungry and asking about hockey. Resilience doesn't look the way you expect it to. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up in small decisions. To get out of bed, to go back to school, to sit beside the quiet kid at the edge of the group and make sure he knows someone sees him. That's what Ethan does now. He sees people. Dale and his wife made a calculated decision, and the calculation was wrong in every direction. They believed that causing harm to someone vulnerable would give them leverage over someone stronger. What they did not account for, what people who operate that way rarely account for, is that cruelty has a way of clarifying things for everyone watching. It clarified things for a judge in Brampton. It clarified things for me. And I think in ways I can't fully measure, it clarified something for Ethan too, about what kind of person he wants to be, about what it means to notice someone who needs noticing. He didn't come out of that garage broken. He came out hungry and pale and with a cut on his foot. And then he healed, and then he grew, and now he volunteers with kids who have nobody coming to get them. They wanted to use it. Instead, they made him.